Sovereignty as a concept was born in Europe. It was created in Europe. They created the nation state. The Europeans invented it. And through the colonial empire, they went globally, and then they passed the sovereignty notion on to the rest of the world. The Europeans have thrown sovereignty out the window.
Well, the Canadian Council of Chief Executives is an organization whose members essentially are the 150 CEOs of Canada's largest corporations. I think we've seen the concept of national sovereignty eroded in a whole variety of ways. And while it's an important concept, it's compromised by the Geneva Convention. It's compromised by every treaty that any country enters into. It's compromised by the Charter of the United Nations. It's compromised by the human rights laws. So I think we need to be a little bit mature about the concept of sovereignty. I find it amusing when people put sovereignty as in a kind of crystal jar and say, well, this is the ultimate. Sovereignty is the ability of a country to act in its own best interest in accordance with international law and its commitments to other countries. Because really, national sovereignty is one of the tools that we use in order to give democratic expression, because we've got to break things down into a more manageable size, but at the same time, it's a concept to be exercised with a certain amount of care.
Sovereignty has changed so greatly because of the phenomenon of globalization, where all issues become transnational, whether it's trade, the environment, health, it's all transnational. And so sovereignty has to be understood in a very different way. And at the heart of sovereignty, you have the absolute requirement for deep international cooperation. See, the UN was the first great body that sacrificed, tossed sovereignty out the window.
You can't simply agree to every international agreement just because people say we live in a global system now. We live in an international society now. You have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. The people appointed to head these international groups are appointed by bankers, financiers, and multinational corporations, and not by people with any direct link to the people. So they're not appointed by your elected officials, they're appointed by the groups they're supposed to regulate. The idea of accepting a world that is truly global now, a world where we are interdependent, without looking at the root causes of that interdependence and without looking at the problems that interdependence has caused, is a mistake.
Foreign trade is the key to prosperity. Free trade will bring on a Great Depression.
Hitler had a dream that his big business should dominate the world. He called his dream the New Order. Foreign big business was weakened during the war, and today American big business is the strongest. And they have a dream to dominate the world.
This was not a natural occurrence, and just because we do live in a global interdependent world right now doesn't mean that we shouldn't take steps to mitigate that and to reduce our interdependence so we can be independent and we can independently decide what we want for our futures.
Canadians are saying no to the North American Union, no to the SPP, and yes to Canada's sovereignty.
There are people who equate sovereignty with shutting down the borders, with not collaborating with neighbors, but I think they've got it backwards. I think sovereignty means, how do you strengthen the nation? How do you ensure that the people in a nation have access to health care and to food and prosperity and to security? And if that's the definition, then maybe the best way to approach that is to open it up, not to close it down.
I am a staunch Canadian nationalist because of globalism, because there are global banking and financial institutions and corporations that seek to violate countries' sovereignties by doing whatever they want to those countries with or without the permission of the people in those countries. So because of the global forces at play, because of the global banking system, because of institutions like the IMF, like the United Nations, like the World Bank, like the WTO that wield tremendous power over nations already. We need to defend sovereignty more than ever. All other notions that violate sovereignty, including multilateral trade agreements, take away from us the ability to control what happens in our countries. And that's why sovereignty is so important. Sovereignty is where you and fellow people of that country can determine how you want to live in that country. And without sovereignty, you can't.
I hope you know who Laura Secord was. Yeah. She lived on the American side of the border, and her husband was in the War of 1812, and he was wounded. So she was looking after him when a couple American soldiers busted into her house, forced her to belay them, and the American soldiers didn't know how potent our beer was, so they got a little loopy. And they started talking about their plans to invade Canada. And she overheard this, and she ran 30 kilometers, climbed the Niagara Escarpment, collapsed in front of the Indians, and told John Fitzgerald about the plan to annex Canada. And she stopped it. All the Indians, all the troops, all the settlers, everyone bound together, and we pushed back the Americans. They let us alone. It breaks my heart to think that all that she did is for nothing. Right. Only for Canada to get annexed 200 years later, and we can't let that happen. You need to get out there, you need to tell your friends, you need to tell your family, we need to stop this SPP.
To understand what's happening, we should look at what has occurred under the Security and Prosperity Partnership. That was the intergovernmental arrangement that began in 2005 when Prime Minister Paul Martin, President Vicente Fox from Mexico, and President George W. Bush met at his ranch at Waco, Texas. And they launched this partnership. The following year, they met again in Cancun, Mexico, and established what was called the North American Competitiveness Council. And this council has 30 executives, 10 from each country, who have direct access to the policy-making apparatus under the SPP.
It's the next step towards the North American Union, with the one of the first bigger steps being NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. They have to do it in small stepping stones to condition the people to be able to accept such a thing. So SPP, Security and Prosperity Partnership, is another big step, which is uniting the three into one.
I think the SPP was a good idea in principle, but ultimately it failed because it was implemented in a manner that that closed it off to public scrutiny. And the only people who were invited into the room were the largest CEOs of the largest businesses in the three countries.
And each working group covers every single area of North American society, and it basically says we're going to set the rules for each area of society across North America, irrespective of what the people in the countries want.
What are your thoughts on the SPP, its penchant for secrecy and the lack of democratic process?
This is the leaders' initiative, the Security and Prosperity Partnership?
Yeah, the Security and Prosperity Partnership.
I think we elect people in broad-based democratic processes in order to govern. And when they are seeking re-election, we have the ultimate consultation and the opportunity, if we don't like what they've done, to throw them out. I don't think that democracy means that every citizen is present in every discussion, you know, wherever and whenever it's held.
This is the destruction of Canada, what's going on right now. Look behind me. This is the end of it. The end of our sovereignty is what's happening. How do you feel about the protest? I love that these people showed up, and I fear that things are going to get out of hand. Look at these guys. This is out of control. When did our police turn into these guys? Is this too much police for a protest like this? This is the militarization of our police, and here's proof right here. This is the death of Canada, which is happening right now. Our sovereignty is in trouble.
What happened in Montebello was the people in 2007, in August, in Montebello, Quebec, were fed up with this 2.5-year-old trade deal going forward and merging every aspect of their society and harmonizing the regulations to the lowest possible standards according to what corporations want. They were sick and tired of the information not being given out to the public, not being openly shared, and of not being given any input into what was happening with respect to this massive trade deal. So they massed in Montebello what looked to be about 1,000, 1,500 protesters. There was a security perimeter around the meeting, and there was incredible police presence there.